Once upon a time, in the city of Lagos, there was a young woman named Vivian who had never known the meaning of lack. She grew up in a grand house with manicured lawns, private tutors, and a father who wore his success like a second skin. Her parents, Gerald and Margaret Caldwell, had built the Caldwell enterprise from a small trading company into one of the most respected conglomerates in the region, and Vivian was their only daughter, their pride, the quiet heir to everything they had built. Vivian was not arrogant about her health. That was the thing people always got wrong about her. She drove a modest car when she could have chosen any from her father's fleet. She worked long hours at the company, learning every department from the ground up. Not because she had to, but because she believed that a woman who could not defend what she owed did not truly own it. She was sharp, observant, and slow to trust, except when it came to love. And love, as it often does, arrived when she least expected it. His name was Daniel Brooks, and he had nothing. Not in the way people sometimes say he had nothing to mean he was modest or humble. Daniel genuinely had nothing. He rented a single room in a crowded part of town, shared a bathroom with 4 other tenants, and worked 2 jobs, a daytime security post and an evening shift at a printing press. He had dreams, yes, but dreams do not pay rent, and every month he walked a thin line between surviving and sinking. Vivian met him at a petrol station on a rainy Thursday evening. Her car had stalled, her driver was unreachable, and she was standing in the drizzle looking at her phone with quiet frustration when Daniel pulled over in a borrowed motorcycle and offered to help. He did not recognize her. He did not know the Caldwell name. He just saw a woman stuck in rain and thought it was a decent thing to stop and help. They talked for 40 minutes while waiting for her driver. He made her laugh 3 times. He noticed he looked her in the eye when he spoke, not at her bag or her jewelry or the badge on her stored car. When her driver finally arrived, she asked for his number without quite meaning to. What followed was 6 months of quiet courtship, walks in the park, long phone calls, honest conversations about their very different lives. Vivian told him about her family's money early. She did not want it to be a secret that later became a wall. Daniel sat with the information for 2 days, then called her back and said, "I don't know what to do with the fact that you are rich, but I know I like who you are. And if that is enough for now, I would like to keep seeing you." It was enough. He never asked her for anything, not once. He paid for things when he could, apologized when he could not, and never let pride turn into bitterness. Vivian watched him and saw something she had not seen in the wealthy, polished men her parents had always pointed her towards. She saw a man with genuine character. When she brought him home to meet Gerald and Margaret, the silence in the sitting room was thick enough to cut. Her father asked Daniel 3 questions, listened to the answers, and then looked at his daughter for a long time. Margaret said nothing during the visit, but called Vivian the next morning and spoke for 2 hours. In the end, it was Gerald who surprised everyone. "I built this company from almost nothing," he told his wife one evening. "I don't think poverty is a character flaw. I think we should watch this young man and see what he is made of." They watched, and Daniel was respectful, hardworking, and fiercely devoted to their daughter. A year after that first meeting at the petrol station, he proposed with a simple ring that he had saved for over 8 months to buy. Vivian wore it like it was the most expensive thing she owned. They got married on a warm Saturday in April. As a wedding gift, Gerald and Margaret gave the couple a 7-bedroom mansion in one of the most elegant neighborhoods in the city. 2 cars were parked in the driveway with ribbons on the bonnet. And at the reception, Gerald stood with a microphone and announced that Daniel Brooks would be joining Caldwell Enterprises as general manager, effective from the first day of the following month. The room applauded. Daniel sat very still, his jaw tight, his eyes bright with something that was not quite composure. Later that night, he told Vivian that it was the most humbling moment of his life. "My father doesn't give things to people he doesn't believe in," Vivian said simply. "Don't waste it." He didn't. Daniel threw himself into the role with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything. He studied the company, memorized operations, stayed late, asked questions, and earned respect on the floor before he even demanded it from above. Within months, staff were speaking well of him. The numbers reflected his efforts. Gerard watched him from a slight distance and nodded to himself. Vivian, for her part, took a step back. She had managed several departments before the wedding, and she had been closely involved in daily operations for years. But she and her father agreed that Daniel needed space for him to grow into the role without her shadow falling over him. So she handed over her responsibilities formally, passed the keys to the relevant offices, briefed him on every detail, and settled into a quieter season at home. She was not idle. She worked on a long-term expansion proposal her father had been sitting on, attended board meetings when required, and spent her mornings reading, planning, and managing the household. She was by any measure a woman at rest, which was different from a woman doing nothing. But not everyone understood the difference. They arrived on a Wednesday unannounced. Vivian was in the kitchen when she heard the gate bell. She went to the intercom and saw on the camera two women standing at the entrance with large bags and the casual confidence of people who believed they had every right to be wherever they were standing. One was older, Daniel's mother, Rose Brooks. The other was younger, mid-20s with sharp eyes and a restless mouth. That was Sandra, Daniel's only sister. Vivian opened the gate. She welcomed them warmly, showed them to the guest rooms on the second floor, made sure they were comfortable, brought cold drinks to their room. She did everything a gracious wife and a daughter-in-law was expected to do. Then she went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited for her husband to come home. When Daniel arrived that evening, she was calm. "Your mother and sister came today. They didn't call ahead." He went quiet. "I didn't know they were coming." "I know," she said. "I just want us to be on the same page. They are welcome here, but our home has a rhythm and I'd like to keep it that way. Can you speak with them?" He did. Whatever was said in that conversation, the evening passed without incident. Dinner was quiet and polite. Rose complimented the food. Sandra looked around the house with wide eyes. She tried to keep disinterested. Vivian smiled and asked them about their journey. She thought, perhaps naively, that it would be fine. By the next morning, Daniel left for work at 7:30. By 9 o'clock, the atmosphere in the house had changed. Rose came downstairs in her house clothes and walked through the sitting room with the slow, assessing pace of a woman taking inventory. Sandra followed, picking up decorative items and setting them down without care. They moved through the space as though they were already reimagining it. Vivian was in the study, working on her expansion proposal, when Sandra knocked and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. "You're still in the house?" Sandra said, leaning against the door frame. "Good morning, Sandra," Vivian said. "It's almost 10. Don't you have somewhere to be?" Vivian looked at her steadily. "I work from home at the moment." Sandra made a sound in her throat that was not quite a laugh. "Work," she repeated, as though the word were a joke she was too polite to finish. She left the doorway. Vivian returned to her document. But it escalated. Over the days that followed, the comments came steadily, like water wearing at stone. Rose began making remarks over breakfast, about how Vivian slept late, about how a good wife should cook every meal herself, about how women who stayed home all day grew soft and selfish. Sandra was less subtle. She would say directly, more than once, that Vivian was sitting and eating her brother's money, that she was lazy, that she brought nothing of value to the house, that Daniel deserved a woman who contributed something real. My brother works himself to the bone every day, Sandra said one afternoon, standing in the kitchen while Vivian prepared lunch. He's the general manager. He carries this whole house. And what do you do exactly? Read books and make lists? Vivian kept chopping vegetables. I support my husband in the ways that work for us. That's a fancy way of saying you do nothing, Sandra shot back. We raised Daniel. We know how hard he works. Don't think because you have a nice face and your parents gave him a job that you own him. Vivian set down the knife. She turned and looked at Sandra for a moment without speaking. Then she picked up the knife again, turned back and continued chopping. That silence enraged Sandra more than any argument would have. Rose joined the campaign with maternal authority. She told Daniel over dinner one night that Vivian was not a proper wife, that she was too proud, too independent, that a woman who didn't work and didn't cook every day and didn't answer to her husband was not a woman a successful man should keep. She used the word divorce the way some people use it, not as a genuine suggestion, but as a threat wrapped in concern. A man like you, Rose told her son, can do better. You don't need her family's money anymore. You stand on your own now. Daniel listened. He said very little at the dinner table. But that night in their bedroom, he told Vivian about what his mother said. Vivian was quiet for a while, then she asked, and what do you think? He looked at her. I think my mother doesn't know you, and I need to fix that. You don't need to fix anything on my behalf, Vivian said. Just don't let them say it in front of you without a response. That's all I ask. He nodded slowly. You are right. I am sorry. She accepted the apology, but she also made a quiet decision. She called her father the following morning, not to complain, not to intervene. She called him because she wanted to check something, a detail about Daniel's employment contract that she has been turning over in her mind. Dad, she said, the general manager position, whose name is on the former appointment letter. Gerald paused. Yours, as the director who made the recommendation. Why? Just checking, she said. Also, the mansion title, is it still in my name or did we transfer it? It's still in yours. We discussed that the transfer paperwork would wait until after the first year. Vivian, what's happening? Nothing I can't handle. Thank you, Dad. She hung up and went back to her expansion proposal. She was not planning revenge. She was simply making sure she understood the full shape of the room she was standing in. The revelation came 11 days after Rose and Sandra arrived, and it came through the most ordinary of incidents. Sandra had gone to visit a friend who, as it turned out, worked in the administrative department at Cardwell Enterprises. They sat in the cafeteria for lunch, and Sandra, with the loose pride of someone riding on borrowed status, talked about her brother, the general manager, the big house, the company cars. Her friend looked at her with strange expression. Your brother works for the Cardwells? The friend said slowly. You know who the Cardwells are, right? Of course, Sandra said. His wife's family. His wife, the friend said, is Vivian Cardwell, as in the Vivian Cardwell who had been listed as company director since she was 24. The woman whose name is on the employment contract of every senior staff member in this building, including your brother. Sandra just stared. She's not just his wife's family, the friend continued, clearly choosing her words with care. She's the reason your brother has that title. The appointment came from her. The mansion you're living in, I heard it is in her name. The cars, the company, everything you've been walking around feeling proud about, that's her. All of it. The cafeteria noise continued around them. Sandra sat very still. She went home early that day. She found Rose in the sitting room and told her everything in a low, urgent voice. Rose listened without interrupting. When Sandra finished, the older woman sat for a long time looking at her hands. Upstairs, Vivian was in the study. She had a knock at the door, had the quietness that followed, and she knew that something had shifted. They came to her together. Rose first, Sandra a step behind. The door to the study was open, and Vivian looked up from her work as they appeared in the doorway. Neither of them had the sharp edges they had carried for 11 days. Rose looked tired. Sandra looked like a young woman who had just seen something she could not unsee. "We need to speak with you," Rose said. "Come in," Vivian said. They sat. Rose folded and unfolded her hands. Sandra stared at the carpet. "We didn't know," Rose started, "about the company, about the house, about all of it. We thought..." She stopped. "We thought you were living on Daniel's work. We didn't understand." "I know," Vivian said quietly. "We said things," Sandra said, her voice smaller than Vivian had ever heard it. "I said things to you that were..." She pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." Vivian looked at her for a moment. "That's the part I want you to think about," she said gently. "You didn't know who I was, and that's exactly when character is tested, not when you're standing in front of someone you know is powerful. Anyone can be respectful then. The question is who you are when you think the person in front of you has nothing." Rose blinked. Sandra looked up from the carpet. "I never once made your brother feel small because he had nothing when we met," Vivian continued. "Not once. I saw who he was, and I chose him. I gave up nothing by loving him. I gained everything. That is the kind of love that builds something lasting." She stood up slowly, smoothed her top, and looked at them both with something that was not anger and was not cold. It was simply clear. "I forgive you," she said. "Both of you. And you are still welcomed in this house. But I need you to understand that this house, this life, this company, it exists because two people chose each other and chose to build together, not because one person carried another. Together." Rose looked at her daughter-in-law, and for the first time since she arrived, she truly saw her. She stood up, crossed the small space between them, and took Vivian's hand in both of hers. Her eyes were wet. "You are more than we deserved," Rose said. When Daniel came home that evening, he found his mother and his sister in the kitchen with his wife, all three of them cooking. There was laughter coming from behind the door. He stood in the hallway for a moment, briefcase in hand, listening to the sound of it. He walked in, and Vivian looked up at him with a smile that told him, without a single word, that the storm has passed. Later, when they were alone, she told him everything. He sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hand for a long while. When he looked up, his eyes were serious. "You handled it with more grace than I would have," he said. "You would have been hungrier," she agreed. "That is why I handled it." He laughed softly. Then he reached out and took her hand. "I don't deserve you." "Stop saying that. We deserve each other. That's the whole point." And she meant it, not just as a sweet thing to say, but as a truth she had carried from the very beginning. The man who had stopped in the rain for a stranger. The woman who had looked past empty pockets and seen a full heart. Two people who had chosen each other when choosing differently would have been easier. That was the foundation, and no bag carried through an unannounced gate, no bitter word over a kitchen counter, no threat dressed up as concern. None of it had the power to crack up what had been built on something real. Rose and Sandra returned home 2 weeks later. They left with lighter bags and heavier hearts, not from sadness, but from the kind of growth that always cost something. Sandra called Vivian 3 days after returning home. She didn't say much. She just said, "I think about what you said, about character and not knowing who someone is. I think about it a lot." "Good," Vivian said warmly. "Hold on to that." And somewhere in the city, in the glass-fronted city on the 5th floor of Caldwell Enterprises, Daniel Brooke looked out at the skyline and thought about a woman standing in the rain at a petrol station, and how the luckiest thing that has ever happened to him was having the sense to stop. The moral lesson of this story reminds us to never judge someone's worth by what you can see on the surface. Rose and Sandra made the mistake of measuring Vivian purely by what she appeared to be, a woman sitting at home, not going to work, seemingly living off her husband. They never stopped to ask why she was at home, who she really was, or what she had already built before they arrived. Their assumptions made them arrogant, and their arrogance humiliated them. But the story carries several deeper layers beneath that central lesson. Wealth does not announce itself. The most powerful person in the room is often the quietest one. Vivian never for once felt the need to prove herself to her in-laws. She simply lived in her truth and let it speak when the time came.